evening and welcome to the Alchemical Tours podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Hind.
So today's episode is an interview with Jazmin Pirozek, who's an ethnobotanist and traditional healer who serves the Northern Ontario indigenous populations in Canada through teaching and through remembering and rediscovering the traditional plant medicines that were lost due to colonization. Jazmin went as part of her journey to South America, where she learned the traditional Amazonian plant medicines with Maestro Juan Flores Salazar, and then taking that inspiration back to Canada, she's been helping to remember the traditional plant medicine teachings within the indigenous populations of Canada. I met Jazmin at Breaking Convention this summer. She gave a fascinating talk about the healing of the marginalized people through traditional medicines. So this is the interview with Jazmin Pirozek. When did you first know that your life's work was going to be as a healer, Jazmin?
There was always a part of myself that knew I would do that, but more my family knew that. I came from a very strict Catholic background. Like a lot of Indigenous people in Canada, they're either Anglican or Catholic. So both my family practiced that tradition, and we never really practiced our, the shamanic traditions at all, because that's like, it's a no-go zone, really, still in the culture. But when I was younger, I used to pick all the plants, and I used to make all these little brews and stuff. And my mom, it's not that she's telling me stories about it, it's that I have memories from when I was very little. Like, I mean, before I could walk, and I walked at 8 months, but I have memories that I've corroborated with my family. So I think, and the reason why I mention that is because I think that amount of perception and attention that I had when I was younger led me to exploring education in a different way in my later years. Like, it helped me, it gave me a good background. Like, my family was always very supportive, especially when I would have, visions of what I would call ghosts when I was little, but spirits and entities, and they saw them too. So it was like it was just a normal thing, but not ever beyond the family unit. Yeah. So we never really shared these things. And even to this day, they're pretty logical and rock solid people, and they wouldn't give too much information to the wrong people even too. So they're pretty protected. So when I realized that this is what I was supposed to do and I remember the date because, like I said, my memory, I remember almost everything, and it's both a burden and a blessing. But the day I remember, it was September 8th, 2007, which is, it's 12 years, almost 12. Yeah, it's 12 years now. I left a really abusive relationship. I was being physically assaulted regularly, allowing myself to be. And I finally went home, told my family what was happening. I went home only for 2 days, but in that 2 days, I went to my, because we lived kind of in the woods, and I still live in the same area now that I lived in before. But I went to the woods to our sacred spot. My whole family, we would go to these places just to be quiet. And so I would go to my spot, and I asked the universe, I said, what am I supposed to do? I'm heartbroken. I'm leaving this terrible relationship. My life is falling apart. Just show me which way to go. And I got a response. For the first time in my life, I felt like I got a solid response from the universe, and it was just words in my head, like just came into my head and said, you have to be willing to do anything.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, yeah, of course I'm willing to do anything. And it said again, you have to be willing to get sick.
Mm.
So I was like, well, yeah, like obviously, like I just wanted to get out of where I was. You know, you'd do anything to leave a really bad situation. I ended up going back. Because I was in a university program. I actually fought through all of my abuse and got into university. Got into university for the first year, and then I ended up leaving him when I met my now current husband, who was a good family friend. So it was an easy transition for me, and he's a big part of my healing. I wouldn't be able to be who I am without this man's support. There's just no way.
Yeah.
There's no way. He's my rock.
So you went to university in Thunder Bay?
Yeah, I had to do a year of catch up because I left high school with low grades. So it was really hard to get into any program. I didn't have any background on how to even write an essay. So it was a good year to catch up. And then finally I got into university, and I spent a long time in university. Ooh. It was my saving grace, though, I'll say. It saved me from a life of poverty. A lot of us suffer. If we don't put ourselves out there, we suffer. So I got all the loans that I could get because I couldn't get funding from my First Nation, which happens to a lot of people. Like in Canada, for First Nations people, you don't pay for school unless you have to pay for school, which sometimes happens to us. Sometimes our community doesn't have the money. Yes. And they can't afford to put you through school.
So what led you to go to Peru in search of healing?
So I made that promise on that hill that day, and I said, yeah, I'm going to do anything. And so, 3 years passed. I was doing my university program. I'd gone to the Canada's capital, Ottawa, for a year of schooling, which was great too. The capital is something to see in the wintertime, especially. And I was there for a year. That was great. And then I spent a couple years doing online school, like through my university. They had some online courses. Did that to as far as I could go, and then I went to university. And when I went to university, I started studying boreal forest archaeology, and I became an archaeologist. So I have my training is in that as well. It's hard work, so I didn't want to do it. But then that year, after I was doing archaeology, I started getting numbness in my feet, in the bottom of my feet. And so I went to the doctor, and I'm like, hey, what happened? What's going on here? And I think I saw 3 doctors. They're like, I have no idea. Take some ibuprofen. Yeah. I went to my doctor, finally got referred to a specialist. The specialist tested me with MRIs. I got 2 MRIs and 1 spinal tap. No bueno. Like that's no good. It's not good. Yeah. But I went through it just to see, because I'm a scientist too, I'm traditionalist, but I'm a scientist. So the spinal tap came back negative, but according to the doctor, she believed that I would develop MS into my 30s, my mid 30s, I would develop these problems and, have to live a modified life. And there was nothing that she could do. She said she could give me immunosuppressants, but I know about drugs. I didn't want to take something that was going to suppress my healer. Yeah. That's what it does. It's like my system that heals me. I'm going to tell it to stop. I'd rather reprogram it if we had the option, right? But there were no options in the West for me. There was no options anymore. So I cry for months. I'm in university, still trying to finish university, and I'm upset, up all night. My boyfriend at the time, would rub my back at night. There was nothing he could do. And I felt I had suicidal ideation. Yeah. And that was easy. And again, consider myself a ballsy person. And so I felt like it was dangerous. So I went to go see somebody. I went to go see there's like an indigenous persons counselor at the university. And I told her, well, this is what happened. You know, the doctor said I have MS and I'm suffering this way and that way and every single way. And then I started talking about how I wanted to study. I just heard about ayahuasca. Yes. I just heard about it. My boyfriend, he was looking for any method as well. We were searching big time. And we came across ayahuasca. I read some of the stories people had, and I ran into the good stories. I was lucky.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of very bad stories.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So I ran into some really good ones, and I'm like, oh my God, this is it. This is going to fix me, right? So when I was speaking with the counselor, she's like, I know somebody. She introduced me to that person. That person introduced me to the man that led me to my teacher. So I drove from Thunder Bay to Winnipeg, which is about a 9-hour drive. So I drive to Winnipeg and I have my very first ceremony and I drink the brew. And maybe a half hour to an hour later, I could feel high, like I had cannabis or something. That's what it felt like. And I was getting high, but it wasn't stopping. And then I saw this, it was weird because I closed my eyes and it was like tiles that you would kind of put in your kitchen on the wall, backsplash tiles. And they were beautifully decorated, rainbow colors, and they shimmered and they went clicking by like 8 tiles, click, 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 click. And there was little antlers on the end of this thing's click, 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 click. And then that was it. That was it. I was in that world. I was throwing up, freaking out. Like people are trying to keep me calm. And I was like not having it. And then at the end when I'm calming down and the guy's telling me, he's like, you're not understanding that the perception of time. You think it's going to be like 2 more days. It does feel that way, but it's only going to be a second. And then I had a moment where I saw the teacher who made that medicine. I saw him and he said, you got to come to Peru. Everybody's got to come to Peru. So I leave that ceremony. I'm totally, wow. I'm just like, wow, I touched God. And it was like, I touched God. Like I did that moment when I promised him that I would do that work. And I was like, oh my God, I'm there. And I'm so excited. And, the shaman at the time, he kind of pushes away the really excited ones because they're too excited right away. They're too excited and it's too much. And I get it, especially now. So I left 4 months later. I went to the Peruvian Amazon. I found another one of the shaman's affiliates, and he translated a message to me to go to Peru because everybody only speaks Spanish there. And I went there during their, at the end of October, they have a number of celebrations, including the graduation of all their new shaman. And so I was there, my very first trip for their graduation of all these new shaman. And I marched into that Maloka, the ceremony center, just like I was one of them. And I'd only drank ayahuasca maybe 4 or 5 months before. Like Tyler just drank it maybe a month or 2 before, like my husband. So it was all so fast. And then we became godparents during that time. Like you become a godparent of one of the shamans that my teacher would graduate. He puts kuchma on you and he puts a corona on your head and you practice his medicine on his behalf. Really. It's like you're his agent essentially. And you work for the power of, well, we call it great spirit here, but the power of God. You're working with that. So that's essentially what led me there was sickness. And I had to promise that I had to be sick and it could be forever to be able to go do what I'm doing. And that's.
So the question I've got is, how does this journey to Peru to meet your teacher there link with the reawakening of indigenous healing within Canada?
Yeah, okay. This is my favorite part. because that is the question, right?
Mm.
So my teacher came here in 2009. He came up a couple of times to come visit the shaman that I went to go see the very first time, Jim Sanders. So the teacher traveled here to one of our sacred spots, and we call it Manitowabi. And Manitowabi is the place where the creator sits. And it's this bald rock, big bald rock. And there are all these ancient rock formations, like, 1,000 to 2,000 years ago. Archaeologists aren't sure. There's all these formations made on the rock from rock. And they can be moved, so it's really important that they're never moved and they are in the shape that they're in. But there's turtles, there's thunderbirds, there's a sweat lodge site there. It's a very sacred place. And so we, in the cultures across Canada, we make pilgrimages to the place where the creator sits. So the province next to us is named Manitoba. Like that word actually means the place where the creator sits. So it's actually, one of the provinces, one of the few that are named after, by the people in general.
Yes.
So my teacher visited Manitowabi, and he said that he's from there, and it's been centuries since he's been able to visit. And so when I drank the medicine and when I practiced with my teacher, I came back home, I could hear all the plants. I could hear the plants. I could hear the teachings. I could hear the how, the why, the when, even the when. That's something else.
Yes.
So a lot of people think what I do is a little bit unnatural because I'm pretty young to have seen these things, but I don't think it's unnatural. Once your eyes are open and you want to focus it, the world speaks.
Did the boreal forest, the plants within the land act as your library, as your teacher?
Well, it's when Maestro Juan Flores helped me to learn and refined my perception, I realized that each plant that I could ingest in the forest, it was a book to open. Because if you just spend time with the plant, it'll tell you everything.
Yeah.
And some have more, not more knowledge, just some have very intricate human knowledge. Like they have knowledge about us. Like birch tree has knowledge about us and knows our habits, knows our ways of being, because they remember when we grab their birch bark. They remember when they grab our it's kind of like, it's just so difficult to talk about perception that way. Yeah. Like my perception was refined enough where I can pay enough attention to a thing that's not a human and gather knowledge. It's so, yeah, that's definitely what it is. And there's a way to prepare every single plant. Every plant is good. No plant is bad.
So where within Canada are these healing centres that you're working with?
In the area of, central Canada, so in the Winnipeg kind of region, and expanding out from what I see. And I'll be honest, that in this area of the country, things are pretty tight and isolated. The perspectives are not as, say, vibrant and open as they are on the coastal regions. Like BC is very, very open and they're all about the hippies, but here we're a little bit more conservative, shy. We have lots of shame in this town kind of thing. So everything's pretty quiet. So the healing center that I work with, Tonkiri Integrative Learning and Wellness Center. So I'll work on their behalf and go to the northern communities to, do some care for the people. And then I have my own healing center, which we will start to build actually where I am right now on our land very shortly. But I have to get my funding together. I have to get my stuff together still. But I have a board of directors, and we're just moving little by little as much as we can.
What are the different ways that a healer can work?
Yeah, well, it just depends on what it is. So
Yeah.
if like somebody has eczema all over their body,
Mm.
we have a plant here. Well, cedar. It's a cedar tree. It's not a true cedar. It's a juniper, but we bath the people, and there's a specific ceremony to bath the people with
Mm.
these boughs because it actually numbs the skin and it gives your immune system time to catch up to recover the skin. Like it's going to do that. And it just does that. Um, yeah, there's those types of rituals. There's a lot of sharing circles that we have here and I'm not a big fan of the sharing circles because I think they repeat too much. Like we can't stop. We can't put a cap on the hurt. You know, it's good to
Yes.
express it, to bring out the truth, but there has to be a point where we're moving forward and I don't do a lot of sharing circles myself. When I conduct, say, a Kamarampi ceremony, we might share and we'll feast as well. So being together is a big part of what the culture does.
So many people in the West now have problems with anxiety and mental illness and so on. So what's the sort of indigenous approach for that sort of problem?
Is I believe a lot of those issues, like mental issues, they're wholeheartedly related to what's going on in the guts. Like not enough food, not enough nutrients. I will guarantee actually it's always about the nutrients. So you got to think about what the food supply is in the area that you're trying to heal. Well, in the area that I go to, you have frozen foods.
Yeah.
You have preserved meats, high salt. These are predictable things. I can predict what sicknesses you can get based on the type of food you got and based on the lack of others. But if you're eating traditional food, you get all of the nutrients you would ever need for a whole year if you could just eat traditional meat like twice a week.
Yeah.
You would get everything you need. And then, you know what I say? If you just get traditional food, eat it twice a week and just eat junk the rest of the week, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
You'll be able to manage your illnesses, but these are predictable illnesses. So it's inherent with the environment. The environment is what we put in our body. It's where we walk. It's what we breathe.
So if people want to know more about your work and support it, how do they do that?
Yeah, my healing center has a Facebook page. I did have a website for a time, but we're in a restructuring right now since we're going to be going into the building. And so I've been in a little bit of a lull at the moment, but I have a Facebook page.
So Jazmin, can you share a little bit your vision for the future?
Well, I'm going to continue to do the building of the healing centers. We're going to have a number of different single person retreat houses. You know, in Peru, we call them tambos. They're just little homes that you take time away from yourself in the woods. And I've, maybe 30 or something acres to work with to make a number of these little retreat centers. And then a main meeting center, we call them Maloka, where I would carry out a number of workshops and, healing rituals. But I also want to have a residency too, for individuals who are palliative, kind of like a hospice in part. And I think my retirement goal, though, is to build hot pools at this place.
So, Jazmin, I'd like to really thank you very much for what you've shared with us in this episode. It's been very, very precious. Perhaps we will close at this point, and what I'd really love to do is invite you to come and have further conversations, as I'm sure there's many other things that you could share with us about your wisdom and tradition.
Yeah, that'll work.
Yeah.
I think this is a good start, and I really just appreciate chatting with you at all.
Well, I feel very honored and humbled to talk with you. You have amazing knowledge and wisdom, and I've this feels like an amazing thing to be able to do. So and to share with other people as well, so that to put this out there for other people to hear about it. feels something very important.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
You've been listening to the Alchemical Tours podcast by Dr. Stephen Hine. You can subscribe via iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Mixcloud, and other well-known platforms. Please do not forget to recommend and rate us. If you have any comments, ideas, or corrections, please do not hesitate to email us at podcast@alchemicaltours.com or contact us via Facebook or Twitter. We always love to hear from you. This podcast is community funded and not for profit. To support us, please subscribe to our Patreon page at patreon.com/alchemicaltours. Until next time, this is the Alchemical Tours podcast, and thank you for listening.